Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a place so cold that your breath doesn't just fog. It crystallizes into tiny ice needles that tinkle as they fall to the ground. We're heading to Yakutia, in the remote northeastern corner of Russia, where temperatures plummet to minus 71 degrees Celsius, that's minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends, and where you're about to embark on a peculiar experiment, wearing the same pair of socks for 30 consecutive days. Yes, you read that right. 30 days. Same socks. In the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. You probably won't survive this with your dignity intact. But your feet? Well, that's another story entirely. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel while you're drifting off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the small propeller plane onto the tarmac at Yakutsk Airport, and the cold hits you like a physical wall. It's not just cold. It's a living, breathing entity that immediately begins searching for any exposed skin, any gap in your layered clothing, any weakness in your resolve. The air is so frigid that inhaling through your nose feels like snorting shards of glass, so you instinctively breathe through the scarf wrapped around your face, though even that quickly becomes crusted with ice from your own exhalations. Welcome to the Sakha Republic, better known as Yakutia, a region roughly the size of India but home to fewer than 1 million souls brave, or perhaps foolish enough to call this frozen wasteland home. The city of Yakutsk sprawls before you, a strange collection of Soviet-era apartment blocks, modern shopping centers, and wooden houses, all built on stilts. Everything here is elevated, you notice, and for good reason. The ground beneath your feet isn't really ground at all. It's permafrost soil that has been frozen solid for tens of thousands of years, extending down hundreds of meters in some places. If you built directly on it, the heat from your building would melt the permafrost underneath, and your entire structure would gradually sink into the resulting mud like a ship into the ocean. So instead, buildings perch on concrete or metal stilts, allowing freezing air to circulate underneath and keep the permafrost permanently frozen. It's architecture born of necessity, a constant negotiation with an environment that really doesn't want you here. Your contact, a weathered woman named Sardana, meets you outside the terminal. Her face is almost entirely hidden beneath layers of fur and wool, but her eyes crinkle with amusement when she sees your high-quality North Face jacket. "That won't do," she says simply, her words emerging as a cloud of ice crystals. Within an hour, you're outfitted properly. Reindeer hide boots with multiple felt inserts, thick wool pants under wind-resistant outer layers, a coat made from actual reindeer fur, which, you learn, is hollow-haired and therefore one of the best insulators on Earth, and a traditional Yakut hat with ear flaps that tie snugly under your chin. You look ridiculous. You also might actually survive the week. But you're not here for just a week. You're here for a month-long immersion into survival at the edge of human habitability, and you've decided, perhaps after one too many glasses of wine back in your comfortable, temperate home, to conduct a small experiment within this larger adventure. You will wear the same pair of socks for the entire 30 days. No washing, no changing. The same woolen socks that Sardana provides you on day one, thick and handmade by her aunt, will remain on your feet through every brutal morning, every frigid excursion, every night where the temperature outside makes Antarctica look tropical. Why? Partly to understand the old-timer wisdom that locals swear by, that in extreme cold, the oils and bacteria your feet produce actually improve insulation over time. Partly because doing laundry in Yakutia is a Herculean task you'd rather avoid. And partly, if you're honest with yourself, because suffering makes for better stories, and you're nothing if not committed to the narrative. Historians still argue whether the indigenous Sakha people, the ethnic Yakuts who have inhabited this region for at least 700 years, actually migrated here willingly or were pushed north by conflicts to the south. Either way, they've developed one of the most remarkable cold adaptation cultures on the planet. The Yakut language has over 40 words for different types of snow and ice. Their traditional diet, heavy in horse meat and fermented mare's milk, provides the high-fat, high-calorie fuel necessary for bodies working overtime to maintain core temperature. And their clothing technology, refined over centuries, rivals anything modern science has produced. That coat you're wearing? It's not just warm. It's a masterpiece of thermal engineering that predates Gore-Tex by several millennia. Your first evening is spent in Sardana's home, a sturdy wooden structure painted cheerful blue, elevated on its concrete stilts like all the others. Inside, it's almost oppressively warm, at least 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, because when it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside, you don't mess around with modest heating. The walls are thick, triple-paned windows create insulated buffers, and a serious furnace burns around the clock. You notice plastic bottles of water on the kitchen counter and realize they're not for drinking. They're frozen solid, emergency ice that will be thawed as needed because running water, as you'll soon learn, is a complicated proposition when temperatures regularly hit minus 60 degrees Celsius or below. Sardana's husband, Mikhail, is a stocky man with hands like frozen steaks and a booming laugh that makes the teacups rattle. He eyes your new socks with approval. "Good wool," he says in heavily accented English. "My grandmother, she wore same stockings all winter. Every winter. She lived to 97. You're not entirely sure this is a causal relationship, but you nod respectfully. He goes on to explain that in the old days, during the harshest months, people barely removed their clothing at all. You slept in your layers, changed only what was absolutely necessary, and trusted that the boundary between your skin and the killing cold outside was not something to be breached casually. That night, you lie in the small guest room, buried under a mountain of furs and blankets, and listen to the house. It creaks and groans constantly, the wooden beams contracting in the cold, nails working themselves loose over time and needing constant replacement. Outside, you hear occasional sharp cracks like gunshots, trees exploding as the sap inside them freezes and expands. It's a sound that Yakutians have lived with forever, a reminder that the cold here doesn't just inconvenience, it destroys. It splits wood, shatters metal, turns rubber brittle, and drains batteries in minutes. Every human artifact is engaged in a losing battle against entropy accelerated by temperature extremes. Your socks, day one, feel perfectly normal. Warm, slightly itchy in that Goodwill way, snug inside your boot liners. Your feet are toasty, almost sweaty, and you wonder if this experiment is going to be as challenging as you'd imagined. Spoiler alert, it will be, but not yet. For now, you're simply a visitor to the world's coldest inhabited place, about to learn what happens when humans refuse to let impossible conditions dictate where they can live. The Yakut people have thrived here not despite the cold, but by developing an intricate relationship with it, understanding its rhythms, respecting its power, and finding the narrow paths through which human life can persist. Outside your window, the stars are preternaturally bright in the dry, frigid air. The Milky Way sprawls across the sky like spilled milk, more vivid than you've ever seen it. There's no moon tonight, and the darkness is absolute, broken only by the distant lights of other homes and the occasional passing vehicle, its headlights cutting through the ice fog that hangs perpetually over the city in winter. Ice fog, another phenomenon you've only just learned about, occurs when it's so cold that any moisture in the air immediately freezes into suspended ice crystals, creating a glittering, ghostly mist that can reduce visibility to just a few meters. It's beautiful and disorienting in equal measure, like living inside a snow globe designed by someone with a cruel sense of aesthetics. Tomorrow, Sardana has promised to take you to the local market, where frozen fish stand upright like sculptures and meat is sold in blocks that require a saw to portion. Tomorrow, you'll venture into the real cold, the outdoor cold, the kind of cold that turns saliva to slush in your mouth and makes your eyelashes freeze together when you blink. Tomorrow, your 30-day sock experiment begins in earnest. But tonight, you're warm, you're fed on Sardana's hearty soup and thick bread, and you're about to discover that sleeping in Yakutia requires its own set of skills, balancing between smothering heat under too many blankets and exposing even an inch of skin to the room's cooler edges. You drift off to the sound of ice crystals tinkling against the triple-paned window, and in your dreams, you're walking across endless white plains where the cold is a companion rather than an enemy, where your breath becomes art, and where your socks, those humble woolen tubes, are the thin barrier between comfort and catastrophe. Day one is complete, 29 more to go. Your feet have no idea what's coming. You wake to the sound of Mikhail attacking ice. Not metaphorically, literally hacking at a solid block of frozen water with what looks like a combination ice pick and small axe. It's 6 a.m., still pitch dark outside, and he's preparing the day's water supply with the enthusiasm of a man who's done this 10,000 times before. You shuffle into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, including the socks, naturally, and accept a cup of tea that's strong enough to strip paint. Breakfast, Sardana announces, gesturing to a spread that includes frozen raw fish sliced paper thin, thick slabs of rye bread, butter that's actually soft because they keep it near the stove, and something that looks suspiciously like horse sausage. You're not in Kansas anymore. You're not even in the same thermal reality as Kansas. The sock experiment you announce over breakfast is officially underway. Sardana and Mikhail exchange glances, the kind married couples perfect over decades, containing entire conversations in a single look. Why? Sardana finally asks, not judgmentally, just genuinely curious. You explain the theory you've read about, that in extreme cold, the natural oils produced by feet actually enhance the insulating properties of wool over time, that the slight moisture creates a microclimate that, counterintuitively, keeps feet warmer than constantly changing to fresh, dry socks. You mention the old wisdom of Arctic explorers and indigenous peoples who understood that survival sometimes means working with your body's outputs rather than against them. Mikhail nods slowly. My grandfather, he begins, and you sense you're about to receive wisdom. He told me story. Soviet times, he work on geological expedition. Far north, even colder than here. They bring many socks, many changes of clothes. But the Evenki guide, he pauses to sip his tea. This man, he wears same boots, same wrappings all winter. Never sick, never frostbite. The scientists, with all their fresh socks and modern ideas, 3 of them lose toes. He shrugs. Body is smarter than we think. You're not sure if this is encouragement or a warning, but you're committed now. The socks stay on. Day 2 begins. The real challenge of the experiment, you're starting to realize, isn't going to be the socks themselves. It's everything else that comes with living in minus 60 degrees Celsius temperatures while trying to maintain any semblance of hygiene or comfort. Sardana has explained the morning routine, and it's elaborate. First, you don't simply get dressed. You perform a careful layering ritual that must be done in the correct order, or you'll either freeze outside or overheat inside and create sweat, which is basically a death sentence when you step back into the cold. Sweat freezes. Frozen sweat against your skin creates incredible heat loss. Heat loss leads to hypothermia. Hypothermia leads to poor decisions. Poor decisions lead to death. The chain of causation is refreshingly straightforward. Your base layer goes on first, thin, synthetic material designed to wick moisture away from skin. Then a merino wool layer for insulation. Then the thick wool pants. Then the wind-resistant outer pants. Top half follows the same logic. Wicking shirt, wool sweater, inner jacket, outer reindeer fur coat. The socks, your experimental socks, get tucked into the bottom of your long underwear. Then thick felt boot liners slide over them. And finally the enormous reindeer hide boots that make you walk like you're auditioning for a Frankenstein remake. The whole process takes 20 minutes, and you're sweating by the end of it, which means you've already failed slightly because now you need to stand near the door, cooling down before you step outside, letting that sweat evaporate rather than carrying it with you into the cold. Ready? Sardana asks, wrapped in her own layers until she resembles a very fashion-forward bear. You nod, though you're not sure ready is the right word. Prepared to be assaulted by physics? Perhaps. She opens the door. The cold is personal. It doesn't just surround you. It invades, finding every gap, every opening, every microscopic space between scarf and collar, glove and sleeve, hat and forehead. Your first breath through your nose is a mistake you won't repeat. The tiny hairs inside your nostrils freeze instantly, a bizarre crackling sensation that's equal parts fascinating and horrifying. You switch to breathing through the scarf, which helps, though within 30 seconds it's stiff with frozen condensation. The air temperature is minus 63 degrees Celsius this morning, Sardana informs you cheerfully, which is actually quite pleasant for late January. Pleasant. You're learning that words mean different things here. Walking requires concentration. The ice underfoot isn't the slippery ice you know from winter sidewalks back home. This is different, grippy in some weird way, almost sticky, because it's so cold that the normal microscopic water layer that makes ice slippery doesn't exist. But it's also uneven, rutted, treacherous in its own right. You shuffle more than walk, following Sardana through the pre-dawn darkness toward the central market. Yakutsk at this hour is apocalyptically beautiful. Streetlights create halos in the ice fog, each one a fuzzy sphere of yellow-white light floating in the frozen air. Buildings loom out of the mist like ghost ships. The few people you pass are so thoroughly bundled that you can only identify them as human by their general shape and purposeful movement. No one lingers. No one chats on street corners. Everyone is in transit from one warm place to another, minimizing exposure, respecting the cold's dominion over outdoor spaces. Your socks, inside their multiple layers of protection, feel fine. Better than fine, actually. Your feet are genuinely warm, possibly the warmest part of your body at the moment. You wiggle your toes experimentally and feel them respond. All present, all functional, all happily insulated by wool and reindeer hide and the multiple felt layers that Yakutian boot technology has perfected over centuries. This is going to be easy, you think. This is hubris. Day 2, hour 1, and you've already committed the cardinal sin of Arctic survival. Overconfidence. The market, when you reach it, is a revelation. It's partially enclosed, but enclosed is a generous term for a structure that's basically a roof and some walls with plenty of gaps for air circulation. It needs those gaps because there's no heating. Why heat a space when the entire point is to keep things frozen? Vendors stand behind tables laden with fish frozen so solid they could be used as clubs. Whole salmon, their silvery skin covered in frost, stand upright, leaning against each other like commuters in a crowded subway. Chunks of meat, horse, venison, beef, are stacked like firewood, each piece rock-hard and covered in a fine layer of ice crystals. A vendor notices your obvious foreignness and grins, revealing several gold teeth that seem to be standard dental fashion here. He picks up a frozen fish and wraps it against the table. Sounds like knocking on wood. Good fish, he proclaims. Very fresh. You're about to ask how fresh fish can be this frozen, then realize that in Yakutia, the entire outdoors is a freezer operating at temperatures most commercial freezers can't achieve. These fish were probably caught yesterday, and they're perfectly preserved, frozen faster and more thoroughly than any industrial process could manage. In a weird way, this is the freshest fish market you've ever visited. Sardana hauls you to a woman selling traditional Yakut clothing, and here's where things get interesting for your experiment. The woman, bundled so thoroughly you can mainly see her eyes, examines your boots with a critical air. She says something rapid-fire in Yakut to Sardana, who translates, "She says your boots are good, but you need to check the felt liners every 3 days. If they get compressed, they lose warmth. If they get damp, you must dry them completely." You nod seriously, filing this away. The felt liners are the layer directly over your socks, the next ring of defense. If those fail, your sock experiment becomes a frostbite experiment, and that's not the kind of content anyone needs. The woman continues, through Sardana, "And the socks, you keep the same ones?" Apparently word travels fast, even in a city of 300,000. You confirm your plan. She nods approvingly. Smart. Old way. The foot makes oil, makes warmth. New sock every day, this is soft people idea. Soft people lose toes. You're getting a recurring theme here about toe loss, and you're becoming very invested in keeping yours. Historians still argue whether the Yakut people's migration from the Lake Baikal region to their current homeland was driven by climate, a warming period that actually made this region more habitable, or by conflict with neighboring groups. What's not disputed is that once they arrived, sometime between the 13th and 14th centuries, they developed one of the most sophisticated cold-weather survival cultures on Earth. They brought horse and cattle breeding traditions from the south and adapted them to survive winters that would kill most livestock breeds. They learned from the indigenous Even and Evenki peoples already living here and synthesized that knowledge with their own, creating something new and remarkably resilient. Your second day proceeds with education at every turn. You learn that you cannot touch metal with bare skin, not for a second, not even briefly, because flesh freezes to metal instantly at these temperatures, and you'll leave skin behind when you pull away. You learn that batteries die in minutes when exposed to this cold, so phones and cameras must be kept in inside pockets, against body heat, only pulled out for quick use then returned to warmth. You learn that if you need to urinate outside, and you will, eventually, the process requires significant planning and speed, because exposed skin in -60 degrees Celsius temperatures can develop frostbite in under 5 minutes. You also learn, surprisingly, that your socks are developing a personality. By the end of day 2, they've molded to your feet in a way new socks never do. They've absorbed some sweat, yes, and they've compressed slightly in the high wear areas at heel and ball of foot. But they don't feel dirty yet. They feel lived in, broken in like a favorite pair of jeans. The wool's natural lanolin is interacting with your skin's oils, creating a slightly waxy texture against your feet that's actually rather pleasant. You're aware this could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship or a descent into foot fungus horror. Time will tell. That evening, back in Sardana's overheated home, you peel off the many layers with relief. Everything comes off except, of course, the socks. You examine them in the bright kitchen light. They're still mostly gray, maybe slightly darker at the sole. They smell like wool and feet, but not offensively so, just organically, honestly. Sardana watches you conduct this inspection with barely concealed amusement. "You will write about socks for 30 days?" she asks. "In America, this is interesting?" You assure her that in America, people watch videos of other people playing video games, so yes, sock documentation will find its audience. Mikhail contributes his own quirky knowledge over dinner. Apparently, there's a Yakut tradition that children's first winter boots should never be washed, as the accumulated spirit of warmth from the child's feet imbues the boots with protective properties for younger siblings who inherit them. You're not sure if this is actual tradition or if he's gently mocking your experiment, but either way, it's oddly comforting. You're not doing something completely unprecedented. You're following in a long tradition of humans who learned that sometimes the old ways exist for reasons that modern sensibilities might miss. Day 2 ends with your feet warm, your socks intact, and your confidence cautiously growing. 28 days remain. Outside, the temperature has dropped to -67 degrees Celsius, and somewhere in the darkness, trees are exploding, metal is contracting, and the permafrost that's been frozen for 50,000 years continues its dreamless sleep beneath a city that shouldn't exist but does anyway, populated by people who've mastered the art of thriving where survival alone would be achievement enough. Morning in Yakutia is less a transition from night to day and more a grudging shift from absolute darkness to murky twilight. You wake at 7 a.m. to what your body insists is still the middle of the night, because the sun won't claw its way above the horizon for another 2 hours, and even then it'll manage only a weak, anemic arc across the southern sky before giving up around 3 p.m. This is late January at 62 degrees north latitude. You're living in permanent astronomical dusk, and it does things to the human psyche that you're only beginning to appreciate. The morning routine begins before you even open your eyes. You can hear Mikhail already up, and the sounds tell a story. The clank of metal on ice, chipping today's water from yesterday's block, the whoosh of the furnace being stoked because it's cooled overnight from oppressive to merely warm, and the creak of floorboards as he moves through the precise choreography that keeps a household functional at -65 degrees Celsius. You lie under your mountain of blankets, and yes, you slept in your socks because removing them would violate the experiment and also because your feet, wisely, have no interest in being exposed to even indoor air at this hour, and contemplate the architectural achievement that is this room. The walls, you've learned, are essentially a sandwich of wood, insulation, more insulation, and a final layer of wood, creating a barrier nearly half a meter thick in places. The windows are triple-paned with air gaps between each pane, and there's still frost forming on the inside of the innermost pane in the room's corners where heat circulation isn't perfect. This is normal. This is acceptable. In Yakutia, you don't achieve perfection, you achieve survivability and call it a win. You finally extract yourself from the blankets and immediately regret it. The air in the room is probably 18 degrees Celsius, which is perfectly reasonable by any objective measure but feels arctic when you've been cocooned in 30 degrees Celsius warmth. You dress in layers, the same base routine you learned yesterday, but faster now, building muscle memory. The socks, day 3, greet your feet like old friends. They've definitely compressed further, conforming to every contour of your foot, and there's a slight dampness to them that you're choosing to interpret as moisture-wicking efficiency, rather than sweat accumulation. The wool still feels warm, slightly oily now, and you notice that they're easier to pull on than when they were fresh and stiff with newness. Breakfast is a revelation in thermal dynamics. Sardana has prepared kasha, a thick buckwheat porridge that arrives at the table actually steaming. You watch, fascinated. As the steam rises in the relatively cool kitchen air, condenses, and creates a tiny localized weather system above your bowl. The kasha itself is nearly too hot to eat, but you learn quickly that you need to eat it fast because even indoors, even in a heated home, food cools rapidly toward room temperature, and room temperature is still barely warm enough to keep butter soft. There's stroganina too, shavings of raw frozen fish, which sounds horrifying until you try it and discover it's actually delicate and clean tasting, melting on your tongue like some kind of Arctic sashimi. You're served it with salt and pepper, and it's genuinely good, which confuses your cultural expectations about what constitutes breakfast. Today, Sardana announces, "We light the banya, the Russian sauna," and your eyes light up at the prospect of actual, intentional heat. But there's work to be done first. Mikhail explains that the banya is a separate structure, 20 meters from the main house, because fire risk in these temperatures is catastrophic. Everything is so dry that wood burns ferociously, and help is far away in the best of times. It needs to be heated for 4 hours before it's usable. And that process begins with him trudging through the snow-packed path to the small wooden building that looks like a miniature house on stilts. You volunteer to help, partly out of politeness, partly out of genuine curiosity. Bundling up is becoming routine now. The layers, the careful tucking, the glove-over-sleeve overlap, the scarf wrapped just so. Your socks are settled deep in their boot and felt cocoon, and your feet are honestly the least of your worries. It's your face that's vulnerable, the thin skin around your eyes, the tip of your nose that's already feeling tight and strange after just 2 days of this. Outside, the cold is, and you're running out of ways to describe this, aggressive. It's minus 68 degrees Celsius, according to Sardana's thermometer, and the ice fog is thick enough that you can barely see the banya until you're almost at its door. Mikhail attacks the door with characteristic vigor, because yes, it's frozen shut, ice having formed in the microscopic gap between door and frame. Everything here that has moisture has ice. Everything that can freeze does freeze. You are living in a world that is fundamentally hostile to liquid water, and therefore fundamentally hostile to life as most of Earth knows it. The banya interior is currently the same temperature as outside, which means it's essentially a wooden freezer. Your breath creates instant clouds of ice crystals that fall to the floor with tiny tinking sounds. Mikhail sets about building the fire in the special stove, a massive iron contraption that holds a pile of rocks on top. Finished design, he says with approval, but Russian improvements. The improvements apparently involve making it larger and more brutally efficient. He arranges birch logs with the care of a priest preparing an offering, adds kindling, strikes a match, and coaxes flame into being. Fire at minus 68 degrees Celsius behaves weirdly. The kindling seems reluctant to catch, the extreme cold fighting the combustion, but once it takes, it burns with unusual intensity. You watch, mesmerized, as Mikhail feeds increasingly larger pieces of wood into the growing inferno. The stove will need to reach tremendous temperatures to heat the rocks sufficiently, and those rocks will then radiate heat for hours, creating the banya experience. But that's 4 hours away. For now, it's just you, Mikhail, and a growing fire in a frozen wooden box, and you're learning that patience isn't just a virtue in Yakutia, it's a survival requirement. Walking back to the main house, you notice your socks have generated actual warmth. The combination of walking, the insulation, and whatever biological chemical magic is happening between wool and feet has created a microclimate that's genuinely comfortable. Your toes wiggle happily in their felt and leather cave. This is perhaps the experiment's first major data point. 3 days in, the socks are not just surviving, they're performing. The morning proceeds with Sardana's patient instruction in the daily tasks that keep a Yakutian household running. Water management is an entire science. The block of ice Mikhail chipped earlier is now melting in a large pot on the stove. Slowly, because ice at minus 60 degrees Celsius takes a surprising amount of energy to convert to liquid water. This water will be for cooking and drinking. Washing water comes from a separate supply, and it's used sparingly because every drop requires fuel to melt and heat. Showers, you learn with creeping dread, happen twice a week maximum. Daily hygiene consists of strategic spot cleaning with a damp cloth, and even that's done quickly near the stove. This explains something about your sock experiment that you hadn't fully considered. You won't be washing your feet every day either. The socks are staying on, yes, but your feet themselves are becoming part of a different hygiene paradigm. You're not becoming dirty, exactly, you're becoming efficiently adapted. There's a difference, Sardana assures you, though you're not entirely convinced. In winter, she explains, we become like bears. We slow down, we conserve, we keep our warmth close. She's not wrong. You're learning that temperature management is about creating zones, hot zones, near the stove, under blankets, in the banya eventually, warm zones, the main living areas, cool zones, bedrooms, storage areas, and the death zone, outside. You move between these zones deliberately, always aware of the thermal cost of each transition. By midday, though you'd never know it from the weak gray light filtering through the ice crystals on the windows, you're accompanying Sardana to visit her neighbor, an elderly woman named Claudia who's lived in Yakutsk for 83 years. The walk is short, maybe 40 meters, but you suit up completely because 40 meters in this cold is enough to kill if you're not prepared. Claudia's home is even warmer than Sardana's, approaching 28 degrees Celsius, and decorated with a fascinating mix of Soviet memorabilia and traditional Yakut crafts. She greets you with dark eyes that miss nothing and immediately zeroes in on your feet. The socks, she says in Russian, which Sardana translates. You keep them how long? You explain the experiment. She nods, unsurprised. My mother did this. All winter, same stockings. She said changing them made feet soft, made them weak. Strong feet need their own armor. She disappears into a back room and returns with what looks like an ancient pair of boots. Reindeer hide, hand-sewn, decorated with beadwork that's probably a century old. These were my husband's grandfather's. He walked from Yakutsk to Verkhoyansk in these. 200 kilometers. January. Same wrappings on his feet the whole journey. Never frostbite. Verkhoyansk, you've learned, is one of the coldest permanently inhabited places on Earth. It and Oymyakon compete for the title, both having recorded temperatures below minus 67 degrees Celsius. That someone walked 200 kilometers in January, in homemade boots, and survived is both inspiring and terrifying. Historians still argue whether these kinds of journeys were common or exceptional, whether the historical record preserves only the successful stories while countless failures lie frozen and forgotten in the taiga. But the boots in your hands are real, the craftsmanship is extraordinary, and you're holding evidence that humans have been solving the same problems you're grappling with for generations. Claudia serves tea and small dry cookies, and you sit in her overheated parlor discussing the minutiae of cold weather survival with the gravity usually reserved for matters of state. She explains that the key to foot warmth isn't just insulation, it's circulation. If your boots are too tight, blood flow decreases and no amount of wool will save you. The socks must be snug but not constricting. The felt must be thick but not compressed. The outer boot must be roomy enough for air pockets but not so roomy that your foot slides around. It's a delicate balance, and getting it wrong means losing toes, which she's seen happen too many times to count. Especially with Russians who come from the south and think they know winter. The casual way she differentiates between Russians and locals is your first real glimpse into the complex identity politics of this region. The Sakha Republic is nominally part of Russia, but the Yakut people have their own language, their own traditions, and a relationship with Moscow that's been fraught for centuries. During Stalin's era, Yakutia was a dumping ground for political prisoners and gulag labor camps. The cold was weaponized as punishment. Now it's a wealthy region thanks to diamond and gold mining, but that wealth is unevenly distributed, and the people who've lived here forever sometimes watch newcomers with bemused tolerance, waiting for them to fail the tests that winter inevitably administers. You return to Sardana's home in the early afternoon, just as the sun is beginning its retreat. You've been outside perhaps 30 minutes total today, in multiple short excursions, and you're exhausted. The cold is physically draining. Your body is burning calories at an enormous rate just maintaining core temperature, and the constant vigilance required to avoid frostbite is mentally taxing. You're also discovering that your socks are becoming slightly aromatic. Not terrible, not even really unpleasant yet, just present. There's a definite foot smell emerging from your boots when you're in the warm house. A mixture of wool lanolin, sweat, and something earthier that you're trying not to think about too much. The banya is ready by 4 p.m., and you approach it with the enthusiasm of a desert wanderer spotting an oasis. Mikhail has brought the interior temperature to something approaching volcanic, and when he opens the door, a wall of heat and birch-scented steam rolls out into the frozen air, creating a fog bank of epic proportions. This is the moment you've been both anticipating and dreading. You'll need to remove your clothes, including the socks, to enter the banya properly. But the socks, the experiment. Sardana sees your hesitation and laughs. The socks stay on if you want. Some people do. The heat is good for wool, kills bacteria, refreshes the fibers. You're not sure if this is true or if she's taking pity on your weird commitment, but you'll take it. You strip down to the socks and enter the banya. The heat is annihilating. The wooden benches, the cedar-planked walls, the very air itself feels like it's attacking you with warmth after days of cold. You sit on the lower bench, the upper ones are even hotter, impossibly, and feel your entire body begin to surrender. Your muscles, which you hadn't realized were clenched against the cold, slowly relax. Your breathing deepens. The socks on your feet are getting absolutely cooked, and you can feel moisture rising from them as the accumulated dampness of 3 days converts to steam. This is either brilliantly rejuvenating for the wool or you're essentially cooking foot bacteria into a more resilient strain. Time will tell. Mikhail, completely naked and completely unbothered, sits on the upper bench and ladles water onto the rocks. The resulting steam explosion is violent, and the temperature spikes immediately. You're learning that the banya isn't just about getting clean, it's about proving something to yourself, about enduring, about pushing your body to opposite extremes and surviving both. The Yakut people, you realize, have mastered the art of existing between impossible temperatures. From minus 70 degrees Celsius outside to plus 90 degrees Celsius in here, sometimes within the span of 10 meters and 5 minutes. After 20 minutes of what can only be described as voluntary suffering, you stagger outside, yes, outside, into minus 65 degrees Celsius air, naked except for the socks, and the sensation is indescribable. Your superheated skin meets the frozen air, and there's a moment of utter confusion where your nervous system can't process what's happening. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't even feel particularly cold. It feels electric, alive, like every nerve ending is suddenly awake and singing. You stand there for maybe 15 seconds, steam rising from your body in great clouds, and then survival instinct kicks in and you scramble back inside. 3 cycles of this heat, cold shock, heat again, and you're cleaner than you've been in days, more relaxed than you've been in months, and your socks are, well, they're definitely different. The heat has driven out moisture, the steam has penetrated the fibers, and they smell strongly of hot wool and birch and something indefinably clean. Your feet, when you examine them back in the main house, are pink and healthy looking, no signs of any problems. The socks have survived their first major test. Day 3 ends with you understanding something fundamental. Survival in Yakutia isn't about a single technique or piece of equipment. It's about systems, interlocking practices that support each other, redundancies built in, respect for the environment's power. Your socks are part of a larger system that includes the felt liners, the reindeer boots, the way you walk, the time you spend outside, the banya that refreshes everything periodically. Isolated, the socks are just wool tubes. In context, they're part of a survival technology refined over centuries. 27 days remain. Your feet are warm, your socks are holding up, and somewhere outside in the darkness, the temperature is dropping toward minus 70 degrees Celsius. But you're inside, fed, clean in your own way, and beginning to understand why people stay in this impossible place. You wake on day 4 to a realization that's both fascinating and mildly horrifying. Your body is changing. Not dramatically, not in ways visible to the naked eye, but cellularly, systemically, your biology is adapting to an environment it was never designed for. Your appetite has increased noticeably. You're craving fat and calories with an intensity that surprises you. Your skin feels different, drier and tighter, despite Sardana's insistence that you slather on thick cream every night. And your feet, encased in their increasingly lived-in socks, seem to have developed their own microclimate, a self-regulating system that keeps them consistently warm even when the rest of you is shivering during the brief transitions between heated spaces. This is your first full day dedicated to understanding the science of what's actually happening to you in this frozen extremity of human habitation. Sardana has arranged for you to meet with Dr. Yakutia, a physician at the Yakutsk Medical Center who specializes in cold weather physiology. The journey to his office requires a 15-minute walk through the morning darkness. It's 9 a.m. and the sun is just beginning to think about rising. And you're learning to navigate Yakutsk by the lights rather than landmarks. Everything looks the same in the ice fog and darkness, but you're memorizing the pattern of streetlights, the glow of specific buildings, the way certain corners feel different underfoot. Dr. Ivanov is a compact man with the kind of weathered face that suggests decades of exposure to extreme conditions. His office is blessedly warm and cluttered with medical texts, anatomical models, and what appears to be a collection of traditional Yakut remedies in jars that you're hoping are just decorative. He greets you in excellent English. He studied in Moscow and did a fellowship in Norway, he explains, and immediately wants to examine your feet. You remove the boots, the felt liners, and reluctantly expose the socks. Day 4, and they've definitely achieved a certain character. They're darker, particularly at the heel and ball of foot where friction is highest. They're also undeniably aromatic now. Not overwhelming, but present, a musky wool and human smell that fills the small examination room. Dr. Ivanov seems utterly unbothered. Good, he pronounces. The lanolin is activating. This is what we want. He has you wiggle your toes, checks your circulation by pressing on your toenails and watching the blood return, and nods approvingly. No signs of maceration, no fungal indicators yet. The wool is breathing properly. He launches into an explanation of what's happening at the cellular level, and it's genuinely fascinating. The human body, he begins, settling into his chair with the enthusiasm of a man who loves his subject, is remarkably adaptable, but cold adaptation happens on multiple timescales. Immediate responses you've already experienced: vasoconstriction in extremities, shivering thermogenesis, increased metabolic rate. Your body is burning perhaps 30% more calories than it would at comfortable room temperature, just maintaining core heat. But there are longer-term adaptations too, he explains. Studies of indigenous Yakut populations show measurably different physiological responses to cold compared to recent arrivals from warmer climates. Their basal metabolic rate is higher year-round. Their brown adipose tissue, the metabolically active fat that generates heat, is more abundant and more active. They have different patterns of blood vessel distribution in their extremities, allowing them to maintain finger and toe warmth without as much energy cost. Is this genetic or developmental? You ask. Dr. Ivanov shrugs. Probably both. Historians still argue whether the Yakut people carry specific genetic adaptations from their migration history or whether growing up in this environment triggers epigenetic changes that then persist. Most likely, it's an interaction of both factors. He shows you a study from the 1960s Soviet-era research that was surprisingly rigorous despite the political context. Scientists measured the core body temperature, skin temperature, and metabolic rate of Yakut volunteers versus Russian volunteers from temperate regions, all exposed to the same cold conditions. The Yakut subjects maintained higher skin temperatures in their extremities while using less metabolic energy to do so. Their bodies had somehow learned to be more efficient with heat distribution. The people here have, on average, higher percentages of type I muscle fibers, which are more fatigue-resistant and better at sustained heat production. Whether this is genetic selection over centuries or developmental adaptation from childhood activity patterns in the cold, we don't fully know. The conversation turns to your feet specifically, and Dr. Ivanov becomes animated. Feet are fascinating. They are thermal regulation organs as much as locomotion organs. You have arteriovenous anastomosis, direct connections between small arteries and veins that can shunt blood and therefore heat. In warm conditions, these open, you radiate heat from feet. In cold conditions, they close, you conserve heat in core. He sketches a quick diagram on his notepad. But if feet get too cold, you get the hunting response, periodic vasodilation to prevent tissue damage. The body chooses between efficiency and preservation. Your socks, he explains, are actually participating in a complex thermal system. The wool fibers trap air, yes, but they also absorb moisture while still insulating, unlike synthetic materials that lose insulating properties when wet. The lanolin coating on the wool fibers is mildly antimicrobial, which is why you don't have raging foot infections despite 4 days of continuous wear. And the slight compression you've noticed, the way the socks have molded to your feet, actually improves contact and eliminates air gaps that could be cold spots. In Soviet times, Dr. Ivanov continues, we did experiments, not always ethical experiments, you understand, but informative, on optimal foot covering for extreme cold. Soldiers, geologists, gulag prisoners. He says this last part matter-of-factly, as if the horror is just historical data now. They tested everything. Frequent sock changes versus infrequent. Synthetic versus natural fibers. Tight versus loose. You know what worked best for extended cold exposure. You shake your head. Natural fibers, moderate fit, changed infrequently, every 5 to 7 days, cleaned and dried thoroughly between uses. Too frequent changing meant feet never fully adapted. The skin stayed soft, prone to blistering and maceration. Infrequent changing, the skin toughened, the natural oils built up protective barrier. This is both validating and concerning for your 30-day experiment. 7 days is one thing, 30 is another entirely. But Dr. Ivanov doesn't seem worried. You have good boots, good felt, good wool. Your feet are healthy. Main risks are fungal infection, but will resist this, and simple hygiene breakdown leading to bacterial issues. Watch for itching, redness, any breakdown of skin between toes. And the smell will get worse. He adds with a grin. Much worse. But smell is not harm. Smell is just organic chemistry. He tells you about the strangest case he ever treated. A geological surveyor who spent 6 months in the field, wearing the same foot wrappings the entire time, never removing his boots. When he finally came to me, I expected disaster. But his feet were fine. Tough as leather, calloused, but no infections, no frostbite, healthy circulation. The human body wants to survive, and if you give it consistent conditions, even strange conditions, it adapts. It's when you keep changing variables that problems happen. The rest of the morning is spent learning about other physiological curiosities of extreme cold survival. Your face, for instance, is adapting too. The capillary density in your cheeks is probably increasing slightly, improving blood flow to maintain tissue temperature. Your eyes are producing different tear composition, slightly more oily to prevent freezing. Even your breathing has changed. You're unconsciously taking slightly shallower breaths to warm air more efficiently in your nasal passages before it reaches your lungs. All of this, Dr. Ivanov says, happens below consciousness. Your autonomic nervous system is smarter than your thinking mind about survival. You learn about a quirky phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where severely hypothermic people remove their clothes, feeling hot even as they freeze to death. It happens because the muscles controlling vasoconstriction finally fail from exhaustion and cold blood from the extremities rushes to the core, creating a sensation of heat. We find bodies in winter sometimes, naked, even though they started out dressed properly. The cold plays tricks on the mind at the end. It's a sobering reminder that, for all of human adaptability, this environment can still kill you with almost casual efficiency. Yakut children, Dr. Ivanov explains, are exposed to cold from infancy in carefully controlled ways. Babies are bundled thoroughly but taken outside daily, even in minus 50 degrees Celsius temperatures, for brief periods. This is developmental programming, he says. The body learns young that cold is normal, survivable, manageable. Children raised this way have measurably better cold tolerance as adults. You ask if adults can develop the same adaptations. To a degree, yes. Your metabolic rate will stay elevated for weeks after you leave, maybe months. Your cold tolerance will improve. But you'll never quite match someone who's lived this since childhood. Biology has timing windows. The conversation inevitably turns to climate change, and Dr. Ivanov's expression becomes complicated. Yakutsk is warming, slowly but measurably. The permafrost is thawing in some areas. Buildings that stood for 50 years are now sinking. But paradoxically, the winter temperature extremes haven't decreased much. We still hit minus 65 degrees Celsius, minus 70 degrees Celsius some years. What's changing is the shoulder seasons. Autumn comes later, spring earlier. The stable deep freeze shortens. For a cold-adapted culture, this is existentially threatening. Our infrastructure, our culture, our biology, all optimized for extreme, stable cold. Unpredictable temperature swings, much harder to manage. You ask about the future, about whether humans will still live here in 100 years. He looks out the window at the ice fog and shrugs. Yakut people have survived worse than climate change. They survived the Russian expansion, the Soviet collectivization, the Gulag era. They'll adapt again. Humans are remarkable adapters. Look at you, 4 days and your feet are already optimizing their microclimate. Give us a century and we'll figure out the new patterns. By the time you leave Dr. Ivanov's office, it's early afternoon and the weak sun has already begun its retreat. Your understanding of what's happening to your body has deepened considerably, and your respect for the people who live here permanently has grown exponentially. You're also acutely aware that your socks are now a documented medical experiment, observed by a qualified physician, and that you have his email address for when, if things go wrong. The walk back through the frozen city feels different now. You're not just enduring the cold, you're participating in a biological process millions of years in the making, the human body's remarkable capacity to function in conditions that should be immediately lethal. Your feet, warm in their increasingly funky socks, are tiny furnaces powered by metabolism, insulated by technology that predates written history, adapted through mechanisms you're only beginning to understand. That evening, Sardana prepares a traditional Yakut meal. Chunks of boiled horse meat, raw frozen liver sliced thin, and thick slabs of bread with butter. The liver sounds horrifying until she explains it's one of the richest sources of vitamin D available, crucial in a region where you see the sun for maybe 4 hours a day in winter. You eat it tentatively and discover it's actually clean-tasting, rich, not nearly as offensive as you'd feared. Your body, deep in its adaptive processes, actually craves it, the fat, the nutrients, the calories. Mikhail contributes a story about his uncle, a hunter who once survived 3 days in the taiga after his snowmobile broke down, temperatures around minus 55 degrees Celsius. He built a snow cave, kept moving enough to stay warm but not enough to sweat, ate the raw frozen fish he'd caught. When they found him, he was fine. Skinny, tired, but fine. He said the hardest part wasn't the cold. It was the boredom. You all laugh, but there's truth there. Once you have the basics of cold survival down, proper clothing, shelter, fuel, the real challenge is psychological. The darkness, the isolation, the relentless sameness of the frozen landscape. Your socks, day 4, have achieved a new level of integration with your feet. They feel less like garments and more like an additional layer of skin. The smell, yes, is definitely more prominent now. When you peel off your boots in the warm house, there's an immediate olfactory announcement of your presence. But it's not rotten or diseased smelling. It's organic, animal, honest. You're becoming, as Sardana put it, like a bear. Less concerned with social niceties, more concerned with survival and efficiency. 26 days remain. Your body is adapting, your feet are warm, and you're beginning to understand that this experiment isn't really about socks at all. It's about the remarkable human capacity to survive in environments we have no business surviving in, using technology and biology in combination, respecting both ancient wisdom and modern science. The socks are just the visible manifestation of something much larger, the ongoing negotiation between human will and environmental reality, played out at the cellular level, one wool fiber at a time. Day 7 arrives with a peculiar milestone. You've now worn the same socks for an entire week, and your relationship with food has become borderline obsessive. You wake from dreams of butter. Not eating butter, just butter, existing, golden and glistening, which Sardana finds hilarious when you mention it over breakfast. Your body knows what it needs, she says, pushing a plate of fatty pork cuts toward you. In winter, we eat like wolves. In summer, we eat like rabbits. This is the Yakut way. The breakfast spread today is formidable. The ubiquitous kasha, now enriched with a massive dollop of butter that melts into golden pools. Slices of stroganina made from fresh frozen whitefish, chunks of dark rye bread, and something new, a bowl of what looks like solidified cream with berries suspended in it. Kerchek, Sardana announces. Whipped frozen cream. Very traditional. You try it and discover it's essentially ice cream, but made with the natural freezer that is the Yakutian outdoors, sweetened with preserved berries from last summer. It's extraordinary, and you eat far more than you should, your body's demand for calories overriding any sense of portion control. Mikhail is watching you with approval. You gain weight since you arrive, I think. This is good. Fat is armor against cold. You haven't weighed yourself, but your clothes do feel tighter, and you're definitely eating 3 times what you normally would. Dr. Ivanov's words echo. 30% more calories just for thermoregulation. You're not getting fat. You're fueling a metabolic furnace that never stops burning. Today's adventure involves visiting the central food market. Not the outdoor frozen market you saw earlier, but the main enclosed facility where the full range of Yakutian foodways is on display. It's a 40-minute walk, which means full Arctic regalia and careful route planning. Your socks, 1 week in, are now definitely part of your foot ecosystem. They've developed distinct zones. The heel is compressed and slightly felted from friction. The arch area is looser and fluffier. The toe box is damp but warm from your toes' constant metabolic output. The smell has evolved too. It's now a complex bouquet of wool lanolin, foot sweat, and something faintly cheese-like that you're trying not to analyze too deeply. The walk through Yakutsk reveals daily life in full swing. School children bundled into unrecognizable shapes trudge through the ice fog, their laughter somehow cutting through the cold. A truck rumbles past, its diesel engine chugging reluctantly. You learn that vehicles here often run 24/7 during the coldest months because restarting a cold engine can be impossible. Some cars have small fires built underneath them to warm the oil pan before starting. The city has a frontier feeling, a sense that civilization is a temporary agreement that could be revoked at any moment by the environment. The market, when you reach it, is the assault on the senses in the best possible way. It's genuinely warm inside, maybe 15 degrees Celsius, which feels tropical after the minus 63 degrees Celsius outside. Your face immediately begins to tingle as blood returns to surface vessels. The air is thick with smells. Fish, meat, fresh bread, something fermented, something sweet, all mingling into an olfactory symphony that makes your stomach growl despite the enormous breakfast. Sardana leads you through with the confidence of someone who's navigated these aisles for decades. First stop, the fish section where the variety is staggering. Omel, muksun, nelma, chur, sturgeon. All fish from the Lena River system, displayed in various states of frozen, smoked, or dried. A vendor offers you a taste of smoked omel, and its revelation, oily, rich, smoky, with a texture that melts on the tongue. Omel is sacred fish, Sardana explains. Lake Baikal specialty, but we get them in Lena River too. In Soviet times, they almost disappeared from overfishing. Now protected, but still available if you know right people. The meat section is equally impressive, and here you encounter things your urban upbringing never prepared you for. Whole reindeer carcasses hanging from hooks, horse ribs stacked like firewood, something labeled as bear meat, which Sardana confirms is legal from controlled hunts, and an entire freezer case dedicated to various organ meats. A friendly butcher, noting your obvious foreignness, offers you a slice of raw frozen liver. You've had this before at Sardana's table, so you accept, and he watches with approval as you eat it without flinching. Good, he booms. You become Yakut. Next you drink kumis, and you are one of us. Kumis, Sardana explains as you move on, is fermented mare's milk, mildly alcoholic, slightly sour, and an acquired taste that she's not sure you're ready for. You file this away as a future challenge. The dairy section reveals other mysteries. Various forms of cultured milk, frozen cream in blocks, butter in quantities that would stock a restaurant kitchen. In winter, Sardana says, we don't worry about refrigeration. The world is refrigerator. In summer, this is different problem. Summer in Yakutia, you're learning, is a bizarre inversion of winter. Temperatures can reach 30 degrees Celsius or even 35 degrees Celsius. The permafrost surface layer melts, creating vast swamps. Mosquitoes arrive in biblical swarms, and the sun barely sets, creating the opposite problem of winter's darkness. The city's entire infrastructure has to handle a temperature range of over 100 degrees Celsius from seasonal extreme to seasonal extreme. Few places on Earth endure such thermal variation. A small vendor in the corner catches your eye, an elderly woman selling traditional Yakut foods. She has several types of butter, all artisanal, all from different sources. Cow butter, horse butter, and something labeled as reindeer butter, which seems almost mythical. Sardana haggles with her in rapid Yakut, and you catch the word American mentioned several times. The woman eyes you with frank curiosity, then asks something. Sardana translates. She wants to know if you can eat real food or only McDonald's. You assure her you can handle real food. She seems skeptical but sells Sardana a small container of the reindeer butter anyway. This is very special, Sardana explains as you continue. Reindeer milk is rich, very high fat content, but reindeer don't produce much milk and they're difficult to milk. This butter is probably 2,000 rubles for a tiny container, maybe $50 in your money. We try it at home, very small amounts. The produce section is modest. It's January, nothing grows here, and everything is shipped in from southern regions at considerable expense. Apples from Uzbekistan, oranges from Turkey, onions from who knows where, all marked with prices that make you wince. A single orange costs more than a kilogram of horse meat. This is the reality of Arctic living. Local proteins are abundant and cheap. Anything that grows in soil is precious and expensive. There's a small section dedicated to foraged goods from the brief summer, dried mushrooms, preserved berries, birch syrup, similar to maple syrup but with a different flavor profile, and something called Yakut herbs that look like dried grass but are apparently valuable for tea and traditional medicine. An old man presides over this section, and Sardana greets him warmly. They converse in Yakut, and she buys several packets of different dried herbs. For your feet, she tells you. We make foot bath later, help with the smell. You're both grateful and mortified that your sock experiment has become a household concern. Your feet, speaking of which, are actually quite comfortable. The walk has generated warmth, the multiple layers are doing their job, and your toes are all responding when you wiggle them experimentally inside your boots. 7 days of constant wear has created a stable system. The socks have compressed where they need to compress, retained loft where that matters, and developed a moisture-wicking pattern that seems to be working. Your feet aren't damp, aren't cold, and aren't showing any signs of distress. The smell, well, that's a different issue, but Dr. Ivanov's words echo. Smell is not harm. The market also has a small prepared food section, and Sardana insists you try some traditional items. Salamat, a hot drink made from flour fried in butter or sour cream, then mixed with boiling water into a kind of thick, savory beverage. It's bizarre but oddly satisfying, like drinking bread. There's also indijurka, a salad made from raw frozen fish, onions, oil, and salt. Essentially a Yakut ceviche, except the fish is cured by freezing rather than acid. You try it and discover it's refreshing, clean-tasting, the frozen fish having a texture almost like very firm sashimi. A young couple at the next stall overhears you speaking English and approaches. They're in their 20s, born in Yakutsk, both fluent in English from online study and determined to leave for warmer climates. Everyone our age wants to leave. The young woman says matter-of-factly, "It's beautiful here, it's home, but it's hard. We dream of Moscow or maybe Europe. Somewhere you don't need 30 minutes to get dressed just to go outside." Her boyfriend nods agreement, though you notice he's wearing a traditional Yakut knife on his belt and speaks with obvious pride about the local diamond mines where he works. This tension, between traditional life and modern aspirations, between pride and cultural heritage and desire for easier living, seems to be everywhere in Yakutsk. The older generation speaks Yakut and Russian, the younger generation adds English and dreams of emigration. Yet the population remains stable, even grows slightly. For every person who leaves, someone else arrives, drawn by high mining wages, by the wildness, by the strange appeal of a place that demands everything from you. The market visit concludes with Sardana buying a massive chunk of frozen fish, probably 5 kilograms of something silvery and frost-covered, and you hauling it back through the cold streets like you've just made a kill on the tundra. The walk home feels longer, the cold more penetrating now that you're carrying weight and your body's heat is being diverted to the effort. But your feet remain warm, faithful furnaces in their woolen insulation, now 7 days strong into the experiment. Back at the house, Sardana prepares uka, fish soup that's somewhere between chowder and bouillon, thick with chunks of the fresh fish, potatoes, onions, and herbs. It's served scalding hot, and you burn your tongue in your eagerness. Then spend the next 5 minutes breathing through your mouth while the soup slowly cools to edible temperatures. The reindeer butter comes out for a ceremonial tasting. Small scrapes on dark bread. It's richer than regular butter, slightly gamey, and incredibly dense. One bite feels like it contains 1,000 calories. Mikhail nods approvingly as you eat. This butter, he says, it could keep you alive alone. Trappers used to carry it. Eat small amount every day with nothing else. Survive weeks. The afternoon is spent indoors, the sky already darkening by 2 p.m. Sardana prepares the foot bath she promised. A large basin filled with hot water and a mixture of the herbs she bought. The water is almost too hot, but you submerge your sock-clad feet anyway. The socks stay on, the experiment continues. The heat penetrates the wool, and you can feel your feet practically sighing in relief. The herbs release aromatic compounds, something minty, something earthy, something you can't identify but that smells clean and medicinal. After 20 minutes, you extract your feet. The socks are soaked but will dry by the stove overnight. They smell better, or at least different. The herbs have temporarily overwhelmed the foot odor, creating a more complex scent profile that's actually not unpleasant. You examine them in the bright kitchen light. Definitely darker now, especially at the heel and sole. The wool has felted slightly in those high-wear areas, creating a tougher, denser fabric. But the structural integrity is solid. No holes, no thin spots, no signs of imminent failure. That evening, Mikhail tells stories of food scarcity during Soviet times, when the supply chains to Yakutia were unreliable and winters could mean genuine hunger. We learned to preserve everything, he says. Fish we caught in summer, frozen in permafrost pits. Meat dried and smoked. Berries frozen, dried, made into jam. Nothing wasted. Even now, with stores full of food, we remember. We keep stockpiles, just in case. It's a reminder that this abundance you see in the markets is relatively recent. That for much of Yakutsk's history, winter meant making do with what you'd prepared during the brief summer bounty. Day 7 ends with you fuller than you've been in your life, your feet cleanish and warm, and a growing appreciation for the food culture that's evolved in this impossible place. The socks have passed their 1-week milestone. Your feet are healthy. The system works. 23 days remain, but you're beginning to believe you might actually complete this ridiculous experiment. Your body is adapting, your feet are thriving in their woolen ecosystem, and somewhere deep in your cells you're becoming just slightly more Yakut than you were when you arrived. Day 15 arrives with a certain grim fanfare. You're exactly halfway through the sock experiment, and the socks themselves have achieved a level of personality that's both impressive and mildly alarming. They are no longer merely garments. They are living artifacts, biological laboratories, complex ecosystems that happen to occupy the space between your feet and your boots. When you peel off your reindeer hide boots in the evening warmth of Sardana's kitchen, the socks release a scent that can only be described as authoritative. It's not putrid, exactly, not the smell of rot or disease, but it is undeniably organic, pungent, and immediately recognizable. Mikhail has taken to opening a window briefly when you deboot, despite the minus 59 degrees Celsius temperature outside. For air circulation, he says diplomatically, the socks themselves have undergone remarkable transformation. The original gray wool has darkened to charcoal in the heel and ball of foot areas, where 2 weeks of constant friction and pressure has compressed and slightly felted the fibers into a denser, tougher material. The ankle area remains relatively fluffy, though tinged yellowish from sweat and oils. The toe section shows interesting variation. Each toe has created its own microenvironment within the sock, visible as slightly different textured zones when you examine closely. The structural integrity remains solid. There are no holes, no dangerous thin spots, though the fabric has definitely stretched in some areas and tightened in others, conforming now to your foot's topography with cartographic precision. Your feet themselves are in surprisingly good condition. You examine them closely this morning, peeling the sock down for the first time in 15 days for a proper inspection. The skin is tougher, definitely calloused in new places, especially the heel and the outside edge of the big toe. There's no redness, no inflammation, no signs of fungal infection despite your initial fears. The spaces between your toes are dry and healthy looking. Your toenails are fine, if slightly yellowed from being in constant darkness and pressure. Dr. Ivanov was right. The body adapts. Your feet have created their own equilibrium with the woolen environment, the lanolin and natural oils forming a protective barrier that's actually functioning as intended. The smell, though, let's be honest about the smell. It's evolved through distinct phases over the past 2 weeks. Days 1 through 3, normal wool and foot scent, nothing remarkable. Days 4 through 7, developing character, the emergence of a muskier undertone. Days 8 through 12, aggressive maturation, the scent becoming prominent enough that you notice it yourself, not just others. Days 13 to 15, full complexity, a bouquet that contains notes of aged cheese, mushrooms, wool lanolin, and something earthier that you're choosing to think of as rustic. Sardana, bless her, has stopped commenting on it, having accepted that this is simply a fact of life now, like the cold or the darkness. Today you're venturing further afield than you've been since arriving. Sardana has arranged a visit to a working reindeer farm about 30 kilometers from Yakutsk, run by a family of even people, one of the indigenous groups who've lived in this region far longer than the Yakuts. The journey requires a serious vehicle, an UAZ 452, the Soviet-era van that's essentially a metal box on wheels, but is beloved across Siberia for its indestructibility. The driver, a taciturn man named Vasily, picks you up at dawn, which is around 9 a.m., since dawn still comes late even in mid-January. The drive is an education in extreme weather transportation. The road is less a road and more a suggestion of where vehicles usually go. A packed snow track that winds through taiga forest and across frozen rivers. Yes, you drive across rivers. The ice is over a meter thick, Vasily assures you, capable of supporting a loaded truck. You try not to think about the dark water flowing beneath as the van trundles across the white expanse. Your socks, deep in their felt and leather cocoon, are keeping your feet admirably warm despite the van's heating system being Soviet grade, which means it sort of works if you're patient and don't expect too much. The taiga in winter is hauntingly beautiful. Larch trees, the only deciduous conifer, you learn, that drops its needles each fall, stand bare and ghost gray against the snow. These trees are perfectly adapted to the permafrost. Their roots spread shallow and wide rather than deep, and they've evolved to handle the temperature extremes better than almost any other tree species. Some of the larches you pass are hundreds of years old, having survived countless winters that would kill you in hours. There's something humbling about that perspective. These trees were here long before Yakutsk, before Russian colonization, before the Yakut migration, just standing silent witness to the slow passage of frozen time. Wildlife is scarce but present. You spot a raven, one of the few bird species that overwinters here, perched on a dead tree, looking philosophical about its life choices. Vasily points out tracks in the snow. Fox, possibly wolf, and something larger that he identifies as moose. Moose are everywhere, he says in his sparse English. Big problem for drivers. They walk on roads because easier than snow. Then they don't move for car. Very stupid animal, very dangerous collision. The reindeer farm, when you arrive, is less a farm in the agricultural sense and more a seasonal camp. The family, grandmother, parents, 3 children, and various uncles and cousins, live in a mix of traditional Uranga, reindeer hide tents, and modern heated cabins, following the herds as they migrate through winter feeding grounds. The reindeer themselves are shaggy, magnificent creatures, their antlers like twisted tree branches, their thick coats making them look twice their actual size. A young man named Nikolai, who speaks surprisingly good English learned from YouTube videos, becomes your guide. Reindeer are life, he says simply, gesturing at the herd of maybe 200 animals pawing through the snow to reach the lichen beneath. They give us everything: meat, milk, hides for clothing and shelter, transportation, even antlers we sell for medicine. He's wearing boots that are clearly reindeer hide, and you ask about the construction. He lifts one foot to show you. Multiple layers of hide. The fur arranged in specific directions for optimal warmth, felt insulation inside, and intricate stitching that's both functional and decorative. My grandmother made these. She makes the best boots in our clan. Some people, they buy factory boots, synthetic materials. Those people lose toes. There it is again, the recurring theme of toe loss as the ultimate marker of inadequate footwear. You mention your own sock experiment, and Nikolai's face lights up with recognition. Yes, the old way. My grandfather, he did same thing. All winter, same foot wrappings. He said changing socks makes feet weak, makes them soft like city person. He disappears into one of the cabins and returns with what looks like ancient strips of cloth, yellowed with age. His wrappings. He wore these maybe 50 years ago when he was young man doing winter migration. We keep them, family treasure. Someday maybe my son will use them. The wrappings are wool, hand-woven, and you can see the same patterns of where you're experiencing in your own socks. Compression at the heel and ball of foot, felting from moisture and pressure, darkening from oils in use. They smell faintly of lanolin and thyme, but not unpleasantly. These are artifacts of survival, proof that what you're doing isn't just a strange personal experiment but part of a longer tradition of humans learning to thrive in impossible conditions. Nikolai's grandmother emerges from one of the cabins. A tiny woman who looks like she's made of leather and willpower. She's dressed in traditional, even clothing. A long coat decorated with intricate beadwork, boots that are clearly handmade, and a hat adorned with what you're pretty sure are wolverine fur. She and Nikolai have a rapid conversation in even, and he translates. She says your socks are good start, but 15 days is nothing. Her mother wore same stockings all winter, 6 months. By spring, the stockings could stand up by themselves. But her feet were always warm, never sick. 6 months. Your 30-day experiment suddenly seems modest. But you're also not sure your modern constitution could handle 6 months. The grandmother seems to read this thought on your face and laughs. A sound like wind through the larches. Through Nikolai, she says, city people have soft feet, soft bodies. But body is smart. You give it time, it adapts. Your feet now are stronger than when you arrived. Yes. You nod. By time you leave, they will be stronger still. Maybe you take some of the north with you when you go. The family invites you to share their midday meal, and you gather in the largest cabin, warmed by a wood stove that's working overtime against the cold. The meal is simple but filling. Boiled reindeer meat, bread that's dense and dark, tea that's been brewing so long it's nearly black, and fresh reindeer milk that's rich and slightly sweet. The grandmother watches you try the milk and nods approvingly when you don't grimace. Good. You can eat real food. Nikolai explains that the even people have been herding reindeer in this region for over 2,000 years, possibly longer. The historical record is fuzzy that far back. We moved with the herds, following the lichen, following the seasons. In Soviet times, they tried to make us settle, live in villages, work in collectives. Many people did. But some families, like ours, we kept the old ways. Not because we're backward, he adds quickly, but because this life works. The reindeer need us, we need them. It's balance. Historians still argue whether the semi-nomadic reindeer herding lifestyle of the even and similar peoples represents an archaic holdover from pre-modern times or a sophisticated adaptation specifically suited to Arctic and subarctic ecosystems that modern agriculture can't match. Nikolai's family seems unconcerned with this academic debate. They know what works, and they're doing it. The conversation turns to changes they're observing in the environment. The permafrost is definitely warming, Nikolai confirms. Some areas where we used to graze, now they're too wet, too unstable. The reindeer don't like it, and we have to find new routes. Winter is shorter than my grandfather remembers. But it's also more unpredictable. We might get warmer spells, then sudden extreme cold. The reindeer handle it, but it's stressful for them, stressful for us. You ask about the future, about whether young people want to continue this lifestyle. Nikolai shrugs. My little brother, he wants to go to university in Moscow, become engineer. My sister, she wants to stay, learn from grandmother while she's still with us. Me? He looks out at the herd, visible through the cabin's small window. I don't know yet. This life is hard. But city life seems hollow, pointless. Here, everything you do matters. The animals depend on you. Your family depends on you. You're part of something old and real. The afternoon is spent watching the herders work, moving the reindeer to a new grazing area. It's delicate work. The animals are semi-domesticated, meaning they're more cooperative than wild reindeer, but still fundamentally wild at heart. The herders use a combination of calls, strategic positioning, and sheer patience to guide the herd. Several well-trained dogs help, darting around the edges to prevent stragglers from wandering. It's a dance perfected over generations, human and animal moving together across the frozen landscape in patterns that probably haven't changed much in 1,000 years. Your feet, spending hours in the cold while you observe, are performing admirably. The socks, now 15 days into their continuous wear, have created such an effective microclimate that your toes remain warm and functional even when the rest of you is starting to feel the cold's bite. The system, sock, felt liner, reindeer boot, is working exactly as the accumulated wisdom of Arctic peoples promised it would. You're no longer anxious about the experiment. You're genuinely curious to see how far this can go. The return journey to Yakutsk is quiet, the winter darkness falling early and absolute. Vasily navigates by the van's headlights and some kind of sixth sense, finding the track across the frozen river, through the forest, back to the city lights that bloom out of the ice fog like distant stars. Your socks are warm, your belly is full of reindeer meat, and your head is full of thoughts about adaptation, tradition, and the strange beauty of a life lived in partnership with environment rather than in opposition to it. Back at Sardana's house, you remove your boots and the smell of your socks mingles with the cooking smells of dinner. Mikhail doesn't even flinch anymore. This is just life now. You examine the socks one more time before bed. 15 days down, 15 to go. They're holding up remarkably well, your feet are healthy, and the experiment that seemed absurd back in your comfortable, tempered home now feels like a legitimate exploration of human resilience. The socks are a vehicle for understanding something larger about survival, about the accumulated wisdom in traditional practices, about the remarkable human capacity to adapt to extremes. Halfway there, your feet are warm. The north is seeping into your bones. 15 more days to go. Day 20 arrives with a psychological shift you hadn't anticipated. The isolation is starting to weigh on you in ways that have nothing to do with physical survival and everything to do with the particular madness that creeps in when you live in near-constant darkness. It's not depression exactly. It's more like your sense of time has become unmoored. Days blend together when every day looks the same. Wake in darkness, move through a few hours of weak twilight, return to darkness. The cold is constant. The routine is constant. Even your socks, 20 days into their continuous wear, have achieved a kind of steady-state equilibrium where they no longer seem to be changing much day to day. They simply are dark, aromatic, functional, a permanent fixture of your existence. Sardana notices your mood over breakfast. The darkness gets everyone eventually, she says, pushing a plate of blini with sour cream toward you. February is the worst month. Still so dark, still so cold, but you've been enduring it long enough that the novelty is gone. Just grinding through. She pauses. This is when people need each other most. Alone in the dark, the mind does strange things. She's not wrong. You've been having vivid dreams, your sleep cycle confused by the lack of normal light cues. Last night you dreamed you were walking across endless ice fields, and when you looked down, your feet had become part of your boots. The socks fused to your skin, the leather growing from your calves like some kind of bizarre evolution. You woke up actually checking to make sure your feet were still separate entities from your footwear. They were, of course, though the socks have definitely molded to your feet in ways that make them feel like a second skin. Today, Sardana has planned something specifically to address the isolation. A visit to the Yakutsk Community Center, where a weekly gathering brings together neighbors for tea, conversation, and the kind of social connection that keeps Arctic communities sane through the long winter. You'll see, she says. Yakut people, we survive winter together. No one does this alone. The community center is a Soviet-era building that's been maintained with obvious care, fresh paint, working heating, and a large main room set up with tables and chairs. When you arrive, around 2 p.m., the sun having just begun its brief, unconvincing appearance, the room is already filling with people. Old women in traditional dress sit alongside young mothers with babies. Elderly men play cards in one corner. Teenagers cluster around someone's phone, watching something and laughing. It's warm, loud, and alive in a way that makes you realize how quiet your days have become. Sardana introduces you to what feels like half of Yakutsk. There's Olga, a schoolteacher who spent 20 years teaching in a village so remote they received supplies by helicopter twice a year. There's Pavel, a diamond miner who works 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, flying to remote mine sites in the Arctic. There's Yekaterina, a grandmother of 11 who remembers the Stalin era and casually mentions that her father spent 15 years in a gulag camp just north of here. For nothing, she adds. He told a joke about Lenin. They heard. 15 years. She says this matter-of-factly, the way you might mention someone had a long commute. The conversation inevitably turns to your sock experiment. Word has spread, apparently, and you're now the American with the socks in local parlance. This generates much discussion, some in Yakut, some in Russian, some in broken English. The consensus seems to be amused approval mixed with gentle mockery of the fact that you're treating as an experiment what many of them simply consider normal winter behavior. An old man named Semyon, who must be in his 80s, leans over and says in careful English, "My whole childhood, we had 2 pairs socks. Winter socks, summer socks. Winter socks you put on in October, take off in April. Everyone did this. We were not thinking about it, just living." A middle-aged woman named Akulina, who works as a cultural preservationist at the local museum, offers a more analytical perspective. The Soviet modernization pushed us toward frequent washing, frequent changing of clothes. This was supposed to be more hygienic, more civilized. But it ignored the traditional knowledge about wool's natural properties, about the body's ability to maintain its own healthy microbiome. She's clearly given this lecture before. Now we're seeing researchers realize that some traditional practices were actually superior for certain conditions. Your experiment would have been just normal life 100 years ago. The gathering includes food, naturally. This is still Yakutia, where every social occasion involves massive amounts of eating. There's a whole table dedicated to different preparations of fish, another to baked goods, a third to dairy products. Someone has brought kyrchek, the frozen whipped cream dessert, made with cloudberries this time, and it's extraordinary. You eat far too much, your body still demanding calories like a furnace demands coal. A young woman named Natalia, probably in her late 20s, approaches you tentatively. "Can I ask?" She begins in excellent English. "Why you came here? To Yakutsk? Most foreigners, they visit in summer, if they visit at all. Winter here, it's just for us crazy people who live here." You try to explain about seeking extreme experiences, about understanding human adaptation, about the sock experiment as a way into larger questions about survival. She listens carefully, then says, "I think maybe you came to understand something about loneliness too, about what happens when you're far from home, in the dark, in the cold. This is winter here. It makes you face yourself." She's more perceptive than you've been willing to admit. The isolation isn't just physical, it's psychological. You're cut off from everything familiar: language, culture, climate, social networks. Your phone barely works in the cold. Internet is intermittent. You've been mostly confined to Sardana and Mikhail's social circle, warm and welcoming as they are. The darkness amplifies everything. Your thoughts echo in the silence. The sock experiment, you realize, has been a useful focus, a concrete thing to think about when the larger existential weight of where you are threatens to overwhelm you. Natalia introduces you to her friends, a cluster of young professionals who are part of what she calls the stuck generation. Too educated to want traditional lifestyles, too attached to home to leave for Moscow or Petersburg. They work in offices, browse the internet, listen to the same music as their counterparts in warmer climates, but they do it all while living in one of Earth's most extreme environments. "It's weird," admits Dmitry, an IT worker. "I do video calls with colleagues in California, and they're in t-shirts, windows open to warm breeze. I'm in my apartment, windows sealed against -60 degrees Celsius. wearing wool sweater indoors. We're working on same code, but living in different worlds. The conversation shifts to mental health, and you're surprised by the openness. Several people mention seasonal affective disorder, treated with light therapy lamps that attempt to compensate for the missing sun. Others talk about the drinking culture that's endemic in Siberia. Vodka as a social lubricant, as a coping mechanism, as a warming agent, both literal and metaphorical. Alcoholism rates are high, they acknowledge, particularly among men, particularly during the darkest months. The cold and dark, they're physical challenges, says Aquilina, but the real challenge is keeping your mind healthy, keeping hope alive when everything outside is dead and frozen. Yet there's also resilience, humor, and genuine community warmth that seems to intensify in proportion to the external cold. The gathering at the community center is testament to this. People making the effort to bundle up, trudge through the ice fog, spend hours in conversation just to maintain social bonds. Isolation is the real danger, everyone agrees, not the cold. The cold you can dress for, heat against, survive. Isolation corrodes from within. An impromptu concert breaks out. Someone has brought a komis, the Yakut jaw harp, and begins playing. The sound is otherworldly, somewhere between musical instrument and shamanic tool, a thrumming vibration that seems to resonate in your chest cavity. Others join in with singing, traditional Yakut songs that you don't understand linguistically but that communicate something about this place. Its vastness, its harshness, its strange beauty. An old woman demonstrates a throat-singing technique that sounds like wind through empty spaces. You're transported, briefly, out of your own head and into something larger, more collective. Your feet, throughout this whole gathering, are reliably warm in their 20-day-old socks. You've stopped thinking about them constantly, they've become background comfort, a solved problem. But during a quiet moment, you mention to the group that you're 2/3 through the experiment. This generates new interest, and several people want to examine the socks. You reluctantly remove a boot, just one, you're not an exhibitionist, and expose the sock to public view. The reaction is mixed. Some people nod appreciatively at the compression and felting patterns. Others wrinkle their noses at the smell, which has not improved with age. Semyon, the elderly man, actually asks to touch the sock, and runs his fingers over the felted heel with something like reverence. Like old times, he murmurs. This is how socks should be. Strong. Part of you. Someone jokes that you could probably stand the sock in the corner and it would stay upright. This is not entirely false. The accumulated oils and compression have given the sock a certain structural rigidity that fresh wool lacks. As evening approaches and people begin to bundle up for the journey home, you realize that this gathering has been exactly what you needed. The sock experiment is a solitary thing, your feet, your endurance, your weird commitment to a questionable idea. But you're doing it within a community of people who've mastered the art of enduring together. Yakutia survives not because individuals are superhuman, but because the social fabric is strong enough to catch people when the isolation and darkness threaten to break them. Walking back to Sardana's house through the frozen streets, you're part of a loose cluster of people all heading in roughly the same direction. No one is truly alone on the streets. There's always someone else visible in the ice fog, another bundled figure trudging through the cold. It's a kind of companionship even without direct interaction. The knowledge that others are out here, enduring the same impossible environment, all making their way toward warm spaces and human connection. Mikhail has prepared the banya again. It's been 2 weeks since the last one, and your entire body is craving the heat. This time, you're joined by Pavel, the diamond miner, who's become friendly with Mikhail over shared vodka and stories. The three of you crowd into the small wooden sauna, the rocks radiating volcanic heat, and for 20 glorious minutes you exist in the opposite extreme from the world outside. Pavel tells stories about the mine, permafrost excavation, underground tunnels that gleam with diamond-bearing ore, the surreal experience of working in artificial light deep in the frozen earth, while outside it's minus 70 degrees Celsius. When you stagger outside for the cold shock, Pavel just laughs at your caution. He walks out completely naked, stands in the minus 61 degrees Celsius air for a full 30 seconds, while steam rises from his body like he's on fire, then calmly walks back inside. After mine work, he explains, This feels like nothing. Underground, it's different cold, damp, deep, gets into bones. This outside cold, it's clean, honest. You're not sure you'd describe minus 61 degrees Celsius as honest, but you're starting to understand what he means. There's something straightforward about environmental extremes. They don't lie or dissemble, they simply are, and you either adapt or you don't. That night, lying under your usual mountain of blankets, you examine your socks one final time before sleep. 20 days down, 10 to go. They're holding up better than you had any right to expect. Your feet are healthy, warm, and showing no signs of distress. The smell is formidable, yes, but contained within your boots and easily ignored once you're accustomed to it. More importantly, you've made it through the psychological halfway point, the part where novelty fades and grinding endurance begins. The community you've found here, the social warmth that counterbalances the physical cold, has made all the difference. You're not doing this alone, even though it's your feet in your socks. You're doing it within a tradition of people who've learned that survival in extreme environments requires not just individual toughness but collective support, shared knowledge, and the willingness to gather in warm spaces and remind each other that winter, however long, eventually ends. 10 days to go. Your feet are warm. You're not alone. The darkness is still oppressive, but you've learned to live with it. The socks, against all odds, are winning. Day 25 arrives with a spectacular failure of modern technology that perfectly illustrates why the old ways persist in Yakutia. Your phone, your expensive, supposedly ruggedized smartphone, has finally given up. You pulled it from your inside pocket this morning to check the time, and the screen was black, completely unresponsive. You brought it inside, warmed it by the stove, tried charging it, performed all the troubleshooting rituals of the digital age. Nothing. It's dead. Killed by cumulative exposure to temperatures it was never truly designed to handle, despite the manufacturer's bold claims about extreme weather performance. Sardana finds this amusing rather than concerning. Everyone's phone dies here eventually, she says, not even looking up from her breakfast kasha. Usually takes a month, sometimes two. The batteries just can't handle it. She gestures to a shelf where she keeps an old Nokia from the early 2000s, the kind of brick-like device that was technologically obsolete 15 years ago. That one still works. Simple phone, simple battery, made when things were built to last. I keep it charged for emergencies. The contrast is stark. Your cutting-edge smartphone, defeated. An ancient Nokia, still functional. Mikhail's Soviet-era UAZ van, still running despite 40 years of abuse. The plastic dashboard of your rental car back home, which would probably shatter into fragments if exposed to this cold for 10 minutes. Modern manufacturing, you're learning, optimizes for average conditions in populous markets. Extreme conditions reveal what's actually robust versus what merely looks sophisticated. This technological failure forces you into a different relationship with time and communication. Without a phone, you can't check the time compulsively, can't scroll mindlessly through social media, can't photograph every moment. You're forced into a more direct engagement with where you are and what you're doing. It's both liberating and unsettling. Like having a phantom limb removed, you keep reaching for the device that's no longer functional. But gradually, over the course of the morning, you settle into the absence. Time becomes what the light tells you, what your body tells you, what the household rhythms tell you. Today's excursion is to visit a man named Victor, who lives about 15 kilometers outside Yakutsk and who, according to Sardana, represents the extreme end of traditional living. Victor is in his 60s, a former geologist who spent 30 years surveying the Arctic for mineral deposits and who's now retired to a life of primitive self-sufficiency. Though, as you'll learn, there's nothing primitive about his approach. It's highly sophisticated, just using different technologies than you're accustomed to. The journey to Victor's homestead is made in Mikhail's truck, following a track that's barely distinguishable from the surrounding snow. Your socks, now 25 days into their continuous service, have achieved what you can only describe as sentience. They have a presence, a character, an almost aggressive personality. The smell has evolved beyond mere foot odor into something more complex. A bouquet that includes leather, wool lanolin with smoke from the banya sessions, sweat, and an earthy undertone that's probably microbial activity but which you prefer not to investigate too closely. The socks can now almost stand on their own when you remove your boots, the felting and oil accumulation having given them structural rigidity. Yet your feet remain healthy, warm, and functional. The experiment is succeeding in ways you didn't fully expect. Victor's place appears out of the frozen landscape like something from another century. A traditional Yakutia resa, a conical wooden structure, a smaller storage building, a banya, and what looks like a workshop, all arranged in a clearing surrounded by large forest. With smoke rises from the Urasa's chimney. There are no power lines visible, no satellite dish, no obvious connections to the modern grid. Victor emerges as you pull up. A tall, lean man with a beard that's frozen into icicles around his mouth, wearing clothing that's entirely handmade from animal hides and furs. "Welcome," he booms in accented but fluent English. "Come, come." Leave the modern world outside. Enter the real world. His enthusiasm is infectious and slightly manic. The enthusiasm of someone who lives alone most of the time and is genuinely excited for company. Inside the Urasa, the temperature is comfortable, maintained by a central stove that's a masterpiece of efficient design. Victor explains that it's based on traditional Yakut models but improved with his own modifications. Better airflow, secondary combustion chamber for more complete burning, thermal mass incorporated to retain heat longer. Soviet engineers thought they knew better than traditional design, he says, stoking the fire. But after 30 years in the field, I learned the old ways work because they're refined over centuries. Modern engineering often optimizes for wrong parameters: cheapness, mass production, planned obsolescence. Traditional design optimizes for reliability, durability, efficiency in extreme conditions. The interior of the Urasa is warm, dry, and surprisingly comfortable. Furs cover the floor and serve as seating. Tools hang from the walls, all hand tools, you notice no power equipment. Shelves hold books, both printed and handwritten journals where Victor records observations about weather, wildlife, and his experiments in self-sufficient living. There's a small window, double-layered with what looks like animal membrane rather than glass. Reindeer intestine, Victor confirms. Translucent, flexible, better insulator than glass in these temperatures. Glass cracks, organic materials flex. You mention your sock experiment and Victor's eyes light up. Show me. You remove your boot, just one, the familiar ritual, and expose the 25-day sock. Victor examines it with the intensity of a scientist studying a specimen. He feels the felted areas, sniffs it without apparent disgust, even holds it up to the light to examine the fiber structure. "Excellent," he pronounces. "You see here at the heel how the fibers have compressed and interlocked. This is natural felting, same process humans discovered thousands of years ago. Creates denser, warmer fabric from the pressure and moisture of use. And the smell, this is lanolin activation, skin oils, some bacterial activity, all normal. Your foot is colonized by bacteria anyway. The sock just becomes part of that ecosystem." He disappears into a storage area and returns with several pairs of what he calls boot liners. Hand-knitted wool stockings that he makes himself from wool he trades for with reindeer herders. "I change these maybe 4 times per winter," he explains. "Each time, the old ones get washed, dried, stored for next year. They last decades with proper care. Modern people, they panic about bacteria, about smell, about daily washing. But skin is self-cleaning organ, and wool is naturally antimicrobial. The obsession with constant washing, constant changing, this is marketing, not necessity." Victor's homestead is a living museum of pre-industrial technology, except he bristles at the word pre-industrial. "These aren't primitive technologies," he insists. "They're appropriate technologies. Industrial manufacturing is appropriate for cities, for mass markets. But here, a chainsaw is appropriate. A snowmobile is appropriate. Electricity would be appropriate if I wanted the expense and complexity. But hand tools, animal power, wood heat, natural materials, these are also appropriate, maybe more so. They don't fail at minus 70 degrees Celsius. They don't need supply chains from China. I can maintain and repair everything I own with materials from within 100 kilometers of here." He demonstrates various tools and techniques he uses. A hand-cranked grain mill for processing flour from barley he trades for. a foot-powered lathe for woodworking, fish traps made from woven willow that he sets in holes drilled through river ice, a complex system of food preservation that involves the natural freezer of outdoor winter combined with smoking and drying during the brief summer. People think living like this is deprivation, he says. But I eat well, stay warm, have meaningful work, spend my time on things that matter. What am I deprived of? Traffic jams? Online shopping? Advertising? The conversation turns to the philosophical, as conversations in extreme environments often do. Victor talks about discovering, during his geological surveys in the high Arctic, that human happiness isn't correlated with comfort beyond a certain basic threshold. The most miserable people I met were in heated camps with modern amenities, watching movies, counting days until rotation out. The happiest were indigenous hunters, living in skin tents, working hard every day just to survive, but connected to the land, to tradition, to purpose. He pauses. Though maybe I'm romanticizing. They had hard lives, but they had meaning. You ask about loneliness. Doesn't he struggle with the isolation? Victor considers this. Sometimes, yes, the darkness in winter can be oppressive. But I have work, firewood to cut, repairs to make, observations to record. I read extensively, I think, and I'm not completely isolated. People visit. I go to Yakutsk monthly for supplies and socializing. Solitude, not loneliness. There's a difference. He grins. Though I admit I talk to the chickens sometimes. They're not great conversationalists, but they listen. He has chickens. In minus 60 degrees Celsius Yakutia. This seems impossible, but Victor shows you the chicken coop. A heavily insulated structure attached to the main uresa, sharing heat from the stove through an ingenious series of ducts. The chickens, a hardy Russian breed, are fluffy and apparently content, pecking at grain and producing a few eggs even in the darkest winter. People assume chickens need warmth, Victor explains. They need warmth relative to their native environment, yes. But these breeds are cold adapted. As long as they're dry, out of wind, and above maybe minus 20 degrees Celsius, they're fine. The shared heat from the stove is enough. Lunch is a revelation. Fresh eggs from these impossible chickens, bread Victor baked in a Dutch oven buried in the stove's coals, frozen fish thawed and fried, and tea brewed from wild herbs Victor collected during summer. It's simple but satisfying, and you realize you've stopped thinking about the food you left behind, the variety, the convenience, the constant availability. Here, food is work, is seasonal, is directly connected to effort and environment. But it's also real in a way that supermarket food, wrapped in plastic and divorced from any visible production process, never quite is. After lunch, Victor wants to show you his workshop, where he practices what he calls appropriate metallurgy, working with scrap metal and simple tools to create what he needs. He's made knives, axes, hinges, even a surprisingly elegant wood stove from salvaged steel drums. The taiga is full of Soviet-era industrial debris, he explains. Failed mines, abandoned geological camps, wrecked vehicles. I salvage metal, use basic blacksmithing, create what I need. People think you need factories for metalwork. You need heat, hammers, and patience. He's currently working on a new knife, heating steel in a forge that's just a concentrated wood fire with forced air from a foot-powered bellows. He hammers the glowing metal, folds it, hammers again, the rhythmic clanging almost meditative. This technology is 5,000 years old, he says between strikes. Still works, still produces excellent tools. I could teach anyone to do this in a few days. Try teaching someone to manufacture a computer chip. The afternoon passes in what feels like minutes. Victor is an endless font of knowledge and stories. 30 years of Arctic expeditions, encounters with wildlife, near-death experiences in blizzards, philosophical musings on civilization and its discontents. You're reminded that intelligence and sophistication aren't the same as formal education or modern amenities. Victor is one of the most educated people you've met, his knowledge ranging from metallurgy to ecology to literature to philosophy. It's just knowledge acquired and applied differently than the credentialed expertise of cities. As you prepare to leave, Victor examines your boots one more time. These are good boots, he pronounces. Reindeer hide, proper felt, traditional construction. And your socks. 5 more days and you'll have completed your experiment. The old-timers would approve. He pauses, then adds, but remember, the experiment isn't really about socks. It's about learning to trust processes you don't fully understand, to work with your body instead of against it, to question whether modern assumptions about hygiene and comfort are actually optimal. You came here to test socks. You'll leave having tested something deeper about yourself. The drive back to Yakutsk is quiet, Mikhail and you both lost in thought. Your phone is still dead, so you watch the frozen landscape pass without the mediation of a camera, without the compulsion to document everything for people elsewhere. You're just here, in this moment, in this impossible place, wearing socks that have become part of you, learning lessons that have nothing to do with the official purpose of your visit. That evening, Sardana asks how Victor was. Strange man, she says, not unkindly. But maybe we're all strange here. You have to choose this life. She's preparing dinner, and you help in small ways, tasks you've learned over the past 25 days. Stoking the fire, chipping ice for water, setting the table. You've become part of the household rhythm. No longer a guest, but something more integrated, even if temporarily. Your socks, hanging by the stove to dry from accumulated moisture, look like artifacts from an archaeological dig. Dark, compressed, shaped to your feet with almost sculptural precision. 5 days remain. Your feet are healthy. Technology has failed all around you, but the ancient technology of wool and lanolin and human adaptation continues performing exactly as it has for millennia. The old ways persist not because people are backward, but because they work. Day 30 dawns, or rather, the darkness gradually lightens to its usual grudging twilight, and you wake with the strange mixture of accomplishment and anticlimax that comes with finishing any long experiment. 30 days, the same socks, the same wool tubes that have been your constant companions through some of the coldest temperatures humans regularly endure. You lie in bed for a moment, wiggling your toes inside their felted cocoon, feeling the familiar texture that's become as much a part of you as your own skin. The socks have survived. More importantly, you've survived. Your feet are warm, healthy, and showing no signs of the catastrophic fungal infections or tissue breakdown that your hygiene-obsessed modern mind insisted were inevitable. The socks themselves are barely recognizable as the fresh gray wool items Sardana handed you on day 1. They're now charcoal dark in the wear areas, felted almost to leather thickness at the heel and ball of foot, stretched and molded to every contour of your feet with cartographic precision. They smell like a small mammal has died and been partially preserved. Not putrid, just profoundly organic, a scent that announces itself with authority whenever your boots come off. But they work. Against all your initial skepticism, against every modern assumption about hygiene and daily washing, they work beautifully. Breakfast is celebratory. Sardana has made blini, thin pancakes served with sour cream, honey, and precious preserved berries from last summer. Mikhail presents you with a shot of vodka at 8 a.m., which seems excessive until you remember that time is meaningless in this land of darkness, and also that you've just completed a 30-day endurance test that deserves marking. To survival, Mikhail toasts, and to stubbornness. You drink, the vodka burning pleasantly, warming from the inside as your socks warm from the outside. Today's plan is simple. Document the final state of the socks, visit Dr. Ivanov one last time for a medical assessment, and then, finally, remove them. The removal feels momentous, almost ritualistic. These socks have been part of you for a month, through every experience, every temperature extreme, every moment of this journey. Taking them off will be like shedding a skin. But first, the documentation. You sit by the window in the weak morning light and examine your boots carefully before removing them. The reindeer hide is worn but intact, darkened by exposure and use. The laces, rawhide, traditional, have stretched and tightened in the cold countless times. Inside, you can feel the felt liners, compressed from 4 weeks of constant wear but still providing cushioning. And beneath that, the socks. You peel off the boots slowly, ceremonially. The felt liners come next, revealing the socks in all their 30-day glory. They are extraordinary. The wool has transformed from a soft, fluffy textile into something more like felt or even thin leather in places. The original knit pattern is still visible in the less worn areas, but the heel and sole have compressed into a dense, smooth surface. The color ranges from the original gray at the cuff, which has been protected inside your boot shaft and seen less wear, to nearly black at the bottom. There are subtle patterns in the felting, swirls where your foot rotates in the boot, compression lines where your toes bend, a perfect impression of your arch. The smell, when released from the boots, fills the room with impressive efficiency. It's not just foot odor, it's a complex bouquet of wool lanolin, human sweat, the wood smoke from multiple banya sessions, something faintly cheesy from the bacterial activity, and an earthy undertone that defies simple description. Sardana opens a window despite the minus 58 degrees Celsius temperature outside. For air circulation, she says diplomatically, echoing Mikhail's excuse from weeks ago. Even the cold, unforgiving Yakutian air seems preferable to the concentrated essence of month-old sock. But you're weirdly proud of them. They're disgusting by conventional standards, yes, but they're also proof of something, that the old ways work, that human bodies are more resilient than modern culture assumes, that the obsession with daily washing and constant hygiene is more about cultural conditioning than actual biological necessity. You photograph them from multiple angles, feeling like an archaeologist documenting artifacts. The socks have become artifacts, in a sense. They tell a story about survival, adaptation, and the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern experimentation. Future you, looking at these photos in climate-controlled comfort, will barely believe current you completed this experiment. The morning visit to Dr. Ivanov is your final checkpoint. You bundle up, the socks still on, naturally, for this last trip, and make the familiar walk through the frozen city. Your feet know this route now, the uneven ice, the slight hills, the spots where ice fog tends to pool. Your body has mapped Yakutsk in ways that have nothing to do with street names or GPS coordinates. Dr. Ivanov greets you with obvious curiosity. The 30-day mark. Let's see the results. His examination is thorough. He checks your feet carefully. Skin condition, nail health, circulation, temperature, signs of infection or breakdown. He examines the socks themselves with scientific interest, feeling the felted areas, checking the compression patterns, even taking a small sample of the surface material for microscopic examination. You agree to this, in the spirit of science. His verdict: remarkably healthy, better than I'd expect even with regular sock changes. The skin is tough, well calloused in appropriate areas, no signs of maceration or fungal activity. Circulation is excellent. Temperature is good. And look, he shows you your toenails under magnification. No fungal invasion, no discoloration beyond normal keratin aging. The socks have functioned exactly as traditional wisdom suggested they would. He explains what's happened at the microbial level. Your foot skin has a microbiome, just like your gut. When you constantly wash and change socks, you're disrupting that ecosystem, preventing it from reaching equilibrium. With stable conditions, same socks, same environment, the microbiome stabilizes. Beneficial bacteria outcompete harmful ones. The lanolin in the wool has mild antimicrobial properties. The felt provides stable moisture wicking. It's a functional system, refined over centuries of trial and error by people who couldn't afford modern hygiene products and who needed reliable cold weather protection. You ask about the smell. He laughs. The smell is volatile organic compounds from bacterial metabolism, lanolin breakdown, and sweat components. It's socially offensive in modern culture, yes, but it's not inherently harmful. Many traditional cultures have very different relationships with body odor. It's seen as natural, normal, even identifying. The modern war on all body smell is recent, maybe 100 years old, driven more by marketing than medicine. Dr. Ivanov provides you with a written assessment for your records. Subject completed 30-day continuous sock wear experiment in extreme cold conditions. Minus 55 degrees Celsius to minus 71 degrees Celsius. Foot health remained excellent throughout. No signs of infection, frostbite, maceration, or tissue damage. Experiment demonstrates efficacy of traditional wool sock use in Arctic conditions and challenges modern assumptions about hygiene requirements. You thank him, feeling validated. This wasn't just a weird personal challenge. It was a legitimate exploration of human adaptation and traditional knowledge. You've learned something real, something applicable beyond this specific context. You've learned that the body is smarter than you give it credit for, that tradition often encodes sophisticated understanding, that modern assumptions aren't always improvements. The walk back to Sardana's is contemplative. This is your last full day in Yakutsk. Tomorrow you fly south, back to Moscow, back to temperatures that won't kill you, back to a world where keeping the same socks for 30 days would be seen as a failure of hygiene rather than an interesting experiment. You're going to miss this place, you realize. The darkness, the cold, the straightforward honesty of an environment that demands respect. The people who've welcomed you, shared their knowledge, tolerated your weird sock fixation with good humor and genuine interest. That afternoon, Sardana organizes a small farewell gathering. Neighbors, friends you've made during your month here, people from the community center. Someone has made a cake, inexplicably, and decorated it with a drawing of a sock in icing. You're genuinely touched. Pavel, the diamond miner, presents you with a small diamond, rough, uncut, but real, as a memento. From under the permafrost, he says, from the deep cold, like your experience here. Klavdia, the elderly neighbor, gives you a pair of traditional Yakut stockings, hand-knitted, beautiful. For when you return, she says, because you will return. The North gets into people. Once you've survived here, other places feel incomplete. You suspect she's right. As evening falls, which is to say, as the darkness deepens from gray to black, you perform the final ritual, removing the socks. You do this in the privacy of your room, wanting the moment to be personal. You peel them off slowly, carefully, like removing a bandage from healed skin. Your feet emerge, pale and slightly wrinkled from being enclosed for so long, but healthy. You wiggle your toes in the open air for the first time in 30 days, and the sensation is strange. Freedom mixed with vulnerability. Your feet look different, tougher, more calloused, the skin thicker and more resilient. They're the feet of someone who's spent a month walking through one of the harshest environments on Earth, protected by nothing more than wool, felt, and reindeer hide. They're feet that have learned something, adapted, grown stronger. The socks lie on the floor like shed skin, still holding the shape of your feet, still radiating their impressive aroma. You pick them up, feel their weight, their density, the transformation that's occurred over 30 days of continuous wear. They're artifacts now, proof of the experiment, evidence that you really did this improbable thing. You wash your feet for the first time in a month, warm water, soap, the works. Feels strange, almost transgressive, like you're washing away more than just dirt and oils. You're washing away the month's accumulation, the adaptation, the integration with an extreme environment. Your feet emerge pink and clean and somehow diminished, like they've lost their armor. That night, dinner is lavish. Sardana and Mikhail have prepared a feast. Stroganina, boiled horse meat, rich soup, fresh bread, the precious reindeer butter, and vegetables that cost a fortune but mark this as a special occasion. You eat slowly, savoring everything, knowing this is your last taste of authentic Yakutian hospitality, at least for this trip. After dinner, you sit by the stove with Mikhail and Sardana, drinking tea and talking quietly. You try to explain what the month has meant, what you've learned, but words feel inadequate. How do you convey the experience of darkness, cold, community, adaptation? How do you explain that an experiment about socks became a meditation on human resilience, on the accumulated wisdom of traditional cultures, on the interface between modern life and ancient survival strategies? You came to test socks, Sardana says quietly. You tested yourself. That's what the North does. It strips away the comfortable lies, shows you what's real. The socks were just the excuse. She's right, of course. The socks were never really the point. They were a lens, a focus, a way of paying attention to something larger. Through the socks, you learned about cold adaptation, about traditional technology, about the remarkable human capacity to survive in impossible places. You learned about community, about isolation, about the psychological challenges of darkness and extreme environments. You learned that your body is more capable and more adaptable than modern comfort has allowed you to discover. You learned that sometimes the old ways persist not because people are backward, but because they're brilliant. Midnight approaches, not that you can tell from the unchanging darkness outside. You pack the socks carefully in a plastic bag, sealing them to contain the smell. You'll take them home, probably have them professionally cleaned and preserved, maybe even donate them to a museum of Arctic exploration or traditional technology. They deserve to be saved. These humble wool tubes that carried you through 30 days at the edge of human habitability. Your feet, now in fresh socks, cotton, from your luggage, feeling impossibly thin and inadequate, feel strange, lighter, more vulnerable, less armored. You already miss the felted thickness, the proven protection, the security of knowing your feet are warm no matter what the thermometer says. Tomorrow you leave. Tonight you allow yourself to simply be here, in this warm room, in this impossible city, in this extreme environment that's taught you more than you expected about resilience, adaptation, and the thin line between survival and thriving. The experiment is complete. 30 days, same socks, some of the coldest temperatures humans endure. Your feet survived. More than survived, they thrived. And you learned that the real experiment wasn't about socks at all. It was about whether you could trust ancient wisdom, whether you could adapt to extremes, whether you could find meaning in discomfort, whether you could connect with people whose lives are radically different from anything you've known. The answer, on all counts, is yes. And now, let me offer you the wind down. You settle deeper into the warmth of Sardana's home, the stove crackling softly, the frozen darkness outside held at bay by wooden walls and human warmth. Your journey through Yakutia's impossible cold is ending, but something of it will stay with you forever. In your toughened feet, in your expanded understanding, in the memories of people who choose to live where winter is a 6-month fact of life. The socks rest in their plastic tomb, their work complete, their story told. Your body is already forgetting the cold, relaxing into the approaching return to comfort, but your mind will remember. Will remember the ice fog and the frozen breath, the reindeer and the endless dark, the community warmth that counters environmental cold, the ancient wisdom that still works, that still matters, that still has so much to teach those willing to listen, to experiment, to trust processes older than civilization. Sleep now, wherever you are, warm and safe, your own feet comfortable in whatever socks you wear, your own challenges waiting for tomorrow. But for tonight, rest in the knowledge that humans are remarkable, that we adapt and survive and even thrive in the most impossible places, that the simple technologies, wool and fire and community, still matter, still work, still carry us through the darkest, coldest nights toward the eventual, inevitable spring. Sweet dreams, travelers. May your feet be warm, your socks be adequate, and your own experiments teach you things about yourself you never expected to learn.